In today's video, I show you how I shot and edited these two photographs to make this one. What is going on, guys? Shooting Dave here. So good to see your faces. Welcome back to the channel. Now, if you're new here and you don't know what I'm about, I am at Shooting Dave, a photographer from London that now lives here in LA. And I make photo and video editing tutorials. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then please do consider subscribing. Now, recently, I had some pretty cool news. My CARonaVirus lockdown light painting series got picked up by Petapixel, and I am unbelievably stoked about that. So if you're new and you came from that article, I welcome each and every one of your new faces. I really do appreciate the support. And many of you have been asking me how I shot and edited this series. So I figured I'd answer some of those questions. So first of all, let's start with the camera gear. I have a Canon 5D Mark III. Right here, it's my trusty workhorse, it's what I use all the time. And on that I have a 35mm f2.8 lens. I also use a 24mm f2.8 IS lens and a 50mm f1.4. The reason for those three different focal lengths? Well, I didn't really know how close I could get to some of these cars. Most of the time I was aiming to use the 35mm, but if I was short on space and I needed to get something a bit wider, then I'd crack out the old 24mm, or if the road was exceptionally wide, I'd use the 50mm f1.4. Now, most of these were shot at either f5.6 or f8, ISO 100, and around about 10 seconds. A lot of you asked as well how I actually managed to trigger the camera. Well, I used an intervalometer. It's this guy, it's a Canon TC80N3. It is an intervalometer, it's a remote. It allows me to set a custom delay on my camera so I can get into position to start lighting, and it also holds open the shutter for any given amount of time that I desire. And as I mentioned, it was around 10 seconds. Another question that I get asked frequently is, what light do I use to light paint these images? It is this. It's a giant LED light. It is called the Camera Plus CP MTL2. I do believe it is discontinued. However, I will leave a link down below should you want to pick one up. There is also an alternative light down there as well, which I would buy if I didn't have this one. However, I have already made a whole video on what is inside my light painting bag, and if you want to check it out in more detail, it is right up here, so click that if you want to learn a bit more about how and why I use specific pieces of kit. Okay, so shooting out of the way, let's jump into Lightroom and Photoshop so I can show you the quick and easy steps that I took to create these images. First, need a beer though. Okay, into Lightroom. Okay, so the first thing that I do when I have my photos is I import them into Lightroom, and I basically make the same adjustments to every single image that I light paint. So if we head over to the Develop tab, we can have a look at some of those basic adjustments that I've made. On this one I actually boosted up the exposure a little bit. That's typically subjective and it depends on the type of image, but yeah, for this one I felt like it needed a little bit of extra life in there to bring out some of that sky. I also dropped the highlights -20 and boosted the shadows -20. Now, why do I do this? Well, I want to have full control, so I like to open up the dynamic range of the image a little bit more so that I'm not just getting a fully crunched down image. If I want to crunch it down at the end, then I can do that, but at least I'd like to have the option. So that's why I lift the shadows and bring back the highlights. No other adjustments made really there. There's only one other thing that I do, and that is take out all the sharpening of the image and all noise reduction. I don't want to be stacking on sharp areas on top of sharp areas. I'm not really sure if it makes that much of a difference, but I just like to control sharpening at the end rather than doing it at the beginning of the project. Moving down, I also remove chromatic aberration and take out any of those lens distortions. So I just enable profile corrections, and the Lightroom detects what camera and lens I used and it takes it out for me. So now that I've done that, I synchronized those settings over to my light painted image, which is here. So the light painted image looks a little bit different to the base image. So let's run through quickly what the settings are. I used ISO 100 on a 24mm lens, f5.6, and it was 10 seconds. And that gave me enough time to move through the image with the light in order to light paint the car. And I was probably stood about 5 feet away from the car, holding the light about head height, and 10 seconds was enough to give me enough time to move from the front of the car to the rear of the car. And you can see that light streak across the top of the image there, and that is actually the light. So that's all there was for the lighting. Now on the background image is a little bit different. I wanted to bring out as much ambient light as possible and a lot of that beautiful blue sky, which is just after sunset, so around blue hour. And for the settings I used for that was ISO 100, same lens obviously, f5.6, but a 20-second exposure time rather than 10. So basically double the amount of light that is coming into it. Now to create the light painted image, it's super simple. We're going to take these two images and select them both, right click, come down here, edit in, and open as layers in Photoshop. Now what that's going to do is going to take both of those images and put one on top of the other, and that is how we start our editing inside Photoshop. Okay, so now Photoshop has loaded both layers, one on top of the other, inside the Layers tab on the right hand side, as you can see here. And on top we have our sky image, and if we hide that, underneath we have our light painted image. So it's super simple here. Now normally here I would spend a lot more time light painting the car. I'd make sure that every single panel is correct. I'd make sure I got all of the car illuminated, but here I was just going for quick and easy light painting, so a single pass. So let's start putting this together. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the background layer to the background so that we've got the car on top. And I'm then going to select the light layer and change the blending mode from normal down to lighten, and what that is going to do is only going to show the areas that are brighter than the image below on top of that image. So if we can turn it on and off, you can see we now have the light through it. Now there's a couple of unwanted artifacts from the light in the image that I don't want, so we're going to slap a mask on there and get rid of those nasty bits that we don't want. So come down to the bottom and you hit the mask tab here, and then we'll take our paintbrush, make sure it's set to black, and I'm simply just going to brush away the bits that I don't want across the top of the image. And then basically that is it. Now I told you it was simple, I told you it was easy, I wanted this to be super quick, I don't want to spend hours retouching this, it's just a little creative itch that I had, and this is an easy way of scratching it. So light painting, although can be very tricky, doesn't have to be, as I've just shown you. Now to take this back into Lightroom, just hit save and it'll take it straight back into Lightroom for you. So I can show you the final adjustments that I did inside Lightroom. So if we click on here, this is actually the finished image that I have. There's been a couple of adjustments that I've made to this. Notably, I changed the aspect ratio. I wanted that 4:5 so you get the nice Instagram size that you want. So if you're having portrait photos, 4:5 is really the best one you want for your Instagram posts. I also straightened out the car because it was on a bit of a bit on a wonk. It was a bit hard to see what the camera is seeing at night in the pitch black, so I kind of had to take my rough guess at it, and I got there in the end. Okay, so let's move down the adjustments. I actually rolled off some of the exposure because I felt it was a little too bright. On the highlights here, I dragged them down a little bit further as well. I also boosted the shadows a little bit more, and then I started playing with the whites. I started pushing them up until I found it pleasing to my eye. I also dragged down the blacks, which is the darkest portion of your image as well, to give it that nice contrast. And I was really happy with how that was looking. I added a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, and typically I always add a bit of vibrance, but counteract that by removing some saturation as well. So those are the basic adjustments that I made to this image. But where I like to do most of my color adjustments is actually in the curves tab. Now I've gone very, very subtle with the adjustments here, but basically just throwing a S curve through there. So dropping the shadows a little bit and pushing up the highlights. If I come over to RGB and change that to blue, you can see I've also pushed a little bit of blue into the shadows and dragged out a little bit of blue in the highlights, and taking blue out the highlights introduces yellow. This is kind of just a look that I like. It's my signature style. I do it on basically all of my images, but you can play around to your heart's content and develop your own style. So moving further down, I left HSL basically as it is. I didn't mess around with anything in there. And the next thing I did is go into sharpening. I use quite a large amount of sharpening. So if you hold down Alt or Option on your Mac or PC over the amount and then click, it'll start showing you how much it's sharpening. But the thing is, you want to actually zoom into your image 100% so you can see what you are sharpening, because we're going to be sharpening in 3 different ways. So the amount is a kind of a global sharpening. So as you hold down Alt or Option and have a look at it, it'll just start defining the image a little bit more if you drag it left or right. And then we've got radius. This is going to be the spread of it. Basically what it's doing is looking for lines or high contrast areas and sharpening the areas around it. And the higher the radius, the more it's going to look. But the higher the radius as well, the worse it's going to look. So you want to find a happy medium here. And I find 1.1 to 1.2 to be the sweet spot. Again, you can hold down Alt or Option on your Mac or PC and have a look at how that's looking. So as we start, if we drag it all the way up to 3, you can see it's really going in there heavy. But if you bring it all the way back to about 1.1, it's only hitting the sweet spot, and that's what we want. The next thing is detail, so the amount of detail that is in there. So if we hold down Alt or Option again and click on this, we can see that it's taking those previous 2 adjustments, kind of multiplying them together. I don't know scientifically how it works, but it's kind of, I like to think of it as multiplying them together, and you can kind of see the effects. So you can see how much is sharpening, but all of this is global, and we want to be a little bit more selective about all of this. So this is where masking comes into it. Now, I love using this because you can go quite heavy with your sharpening, but you can refine it to only sharpen the areas you want. So if I hold down Alt or Option again on the masking tab, click that. Now, if we drag it all the way to the left, the whole image is going to go white. If I drag it all the way to the right, the whole image is basically going to go black, apart from those super contrasty areas. And what you want to do is anything that is white is going to be sharpened, anything that's black is going to be left alone. So you want to find the sweet spot and find the areas that you only want to be sharpened. And it's a little bit different for every single image, but yeah, I like to go quite high with it and only really bring out those lines rather than sharpening the center of paint. So around 70, 75, whatever, that kind of works for me. And then we've got our image nicely sharpened, so it's got that good tonal crunch in there as well, without over sharpening broad areas of the image and introducing noise, which none of us want. Speaking of noise, I've actually done a bit of noise reduction as well, just a tiny bit, just to clean out any of that sensor noise. It's shot at ISO 100, so a very, very clean image anyway, but you never know, it's at night, the camera's quite hot, and hot sensors equals noisy sensors, so I just dumped a little bit of noise reduction in there, just in case there was any noise. It's not really needed though, but again, up to you. And there you have it, super straightforward and super easy, just minimal adjustments in Photoshop with a bit of a color grade inside Lightroom. I told you it was easy. So guys, if you like this video, then you should check out this playlist right here. It has loads of more tutorials inside Photoshop, Lightroom, and photo taking techniques. And as always guys, I've been Shooting Dave, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.